I think law number 10 is the one that took most of the attention globally and regionally with regards to the return of refugees and displaced people to Syria. But I think we shouldn't be viewing law number 10 in isolation to the wider legal framework, the urban legal framework and the urban legislation that have been put by the Syrian government since 2012 to enable the government's vision for post-war Syria, which clearly refers to the homogeneous Syria, as Bashar al-Assad called it in 2017, that Syria that does not include all the diverse segments of the society in there. So when we talk about laws and legislation, we talk about practices. We don't just talk about laws. We talk about practices enabled by these laws to seize land, to expropriate lands and properties, to unlawfully demolish entire neighborhoods in different areas. And we need to look at all of that within its political context, because most of these legislation do pose technical challenges for refugees and for internally displaced people to return, just because of the complexity and how strict the procedural requirements for these laws are. But when we look at this within the political context, it becomes even more complicated, given that the way these laws are manifested in the ground is within the security apparatus of the government. So, and that definitely excludes wide segments of the political components of Syria, political activists, detainees, families of detainees, forcibly disappeared people, and people living in non-government held areas with their families and communities. We also need to look at, other than laws and legislation, the issue of return is very much controlled by the de facto powers on the ground, and these are security checkpoints, areas such as Daraya and Qaboon, which have been, whose people have been evicted systematically over the past few years, have been ghost cities for at least a couple of years now, yet people have not been able to go back even to check on their property. So they're in complete closure, very much controlled by the government. There has been cases where you can pay bribes of millions of Syrian pounds so that you can just get inside and leave on the same day, just to check on your property, or if you can create a shortcut through a military figure or an official, a political official or something. I think we also need to take into consideration the whole set of legislation that was put by the government to that was manipulated and appropriated by the government to control socio-spatial arrangements. We need to look at again at unlawful demolitions for certain neighborhoods that have political specificities or economic specificities. We need to look at the same time, we need to look at the government's reconstruction plan. So the government already embarked on its own reconstruction plans in some of the neighborhoods of Damascus and Basatin al-Razi specifically, that's now being redeveloped into Marota city. We need to look at how this project is being conducted, how shares have been divided, what laws facilitated this, looking at how the original residents of this area, whether they have the deeds to their properties or they don't, and they were living there illegally, how they're being treated, what options they have for the future development, do they have access to this future development? The question is most likely no, because of socioeconomic reason, if not anything else. Especially when we look at how other legal framework facilitated the establishment of legally owned holding companies to manage property issues in the redevelopment zones, and these mostly awarded reconstruction projects to private investors and paid them in shares in the redevelopment zones at the expense of the rights of the original people. We also need to look at who is profiting from this development, and that's mostly in the Syrian context the regime cronies, whether on a national level or a regional and international level. Figures like Rami Makhlouf and the percentages he's purchased in some of the companies and real estate companies that have been assigned reconstruction by the government in the surroundings of Damascus and Homs, but also looking at the opening of Damascus International Fair, for example, that was presented by the government as the start of the reconstruction phase in Syria, and through which investment contracts were signed with Iran and China and different countries, giving them access to resources in Syria and promising them future investments. This will help us understand how urban components and processes are being manipulated to set the vision or to set the plan. They're being appropriated as part of a systematic strategy to facilitate a new liberal post-war Syria. It also takes other dimensions. It could be argued that these are political, sectarian, depending on the angle we look at it from. But I would say that these processes are not just processes within the reconstruction sphere. These are processes of urban planning and urban development that has been taking place in Syria even before 2011. They relate to the politics and policies of how the government deals with informal settlements and with the development and the planning of certain strategic areas, political strategic areas and economic strategic areas in centers of the Syrian cities.